Hello and welcome to another webinar from HTAi, presented by the Real World Evidence and Artificial Intelligence Interest Group. This webinar has been developed by the Artificial Intelligence Group and is provided for information resources and to help develop HTA. To submit any questions during the webinar, please use the Slido link that is provided in the chat. A Q&A session will also be helped to facilitate this, as well as some polling. Thank you again for joining us. I will now hand things over to our host to formally welcome and introduce today's webinar.
Thank you very much, Bryce. I think our chair, Masoud Toussi, who was kindly opening this quarterly meeting, has at the moment connectivity issues. So I'll start the meeting saying thank you to everyone for joining. We're very happy to be holding the fourth quarterly meeting of a fairly recently created interest group. We're only a little bit over a year old, and we're also very happy to have many esteemed colleagues with us. Before we go into the content of the webinar, a few details. We are very, very happy to have two new technical officers. So I will start by asking them very briefly to introduce themselves. Rather than start with saying who we are. So Alessandra, perhaps a word from you.
Hi, yes, my name is Alessandra, and I'm very glad to be a part of the team. I'm currently doing a PhD at the KU Leuven around the value assessment and the managed entry of orphan drugs. So yeah, that's where my research is situating right now.
Thank you, Alessandra. And I believe Masoud has just rejoined us. Masoud, can you hear us? Okay, maybe not. So, Sophia, also a word from you.
Yeah, hello. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Yes, very well, thank you.
Okay, yeah, I'm really happy to be with you as well. My background is a research scientist in molecular biology. I'm currently doing a postdoc, but for a couple of years now, I've been interested in the ethics and governance of biotechnologies and impact, how they can reach patients and the impact of these things. So that's why I was very lucky to be joining you guys. So
thank you.
Thank you.
And we're very happy to have both of you. And we also would like to say to our members that please feel free to reach out either to us or to Alessandra and Sophia for anything content related, technical related, IG or overall HTI issue. Jota, if you are with us, Jota is our project manager for AI related projects. So if you are with us, if you have managed to join us.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm Jota Kopsiapti. I am a medical devices clinical research specialist working for Medtronic, supporting the team as a project manager and really looking forward to this quarterly webinar. Thank you very much,
Jota. Dimitra, my co-chair, my kind co-chair in the group.
Hello, welcome everybody. I am Dimitra Lingri. I'm a barrister and I have a legal background focused on public health law, AI and GDPR. I'm working also at the Hellenic National Healthcare Organization, the national payer, and I'm the managing director of the European Healthcare Fraud and Corruption Network. Welcome everybody, very happy to participate in this webinar. Back to you, Elena.
Thank you very much. I'll give it one more go. Masoud, are you perhaps with us?
Yes, I am back now. Yes, okay. And hi everyone. Thank you very much.
Then I will be very happy for you to take over. Just to say, I'm a public health specialist. I'm also the vice president at the Health Technology Assessment section of the European Public Health Association. I come from molecular oncology and R&D, and I've retrained mid-career in public health and health economics. So University of Crete, academia, and University of Maastricht. I'm very, very happy to be here. And now we'll pass to our chair to introduce himself and hopefully take over. I will be happy to navigate the slide deck, Masoud.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining this call in high numbers. I see there are 94 people on the call. This is our fourth webinar, and I'm happy that we have been able to have the three others previously, and also welcoming our guests here. I'm Masoud Toussi. I'm the chair of the IG, and I'm medical doctor and pharmacoepidemiologist working in real-world evidence area for the last 20 years, and I work with for IQVIA right now. The next slide, please. So this is our as a custom presentation, and in each and every of our quarterly webinars, we make a very brief presentation of our IG, and the objective is to get you, if you are not, if you're new to this type of quarterly meetings, to get you know our IG and also invite you to join us for our future activities. So our real-world evidence and the artificial intelligence IG has been established a couple of years ago, and we have a mission. Our mission is to change and actually improve the dynamics of real-world evidence and artificial intelligence generation, appraisal, and use, especially in HTA. And we have an objective. The objective is to establish a network for and we do this through a number of things. So one of them is a forum. We would like to act as a forum and catalyst for change. And we would like you to interact actually here in this session and in all of the sessions that we are organizing. We would like also to work as an education and training center. And this is what we are doing, for example, with our workshop in annual meeting. And also we would like to connect you together. And we have done this before. And in this way, help capacity building for innovative projects and also provide you resources. And talking about the resources, if you have any project which is in the remit and objectives of our IG and you are looking for funding, for example, we can support you because we can sponsor 1 or 2 projects per year for getting funding in HTAi for these projects. The next one, please. In terms of the activities, so far we have had 3 quarterly meetings. The first one was provided by Ashley Jackson, and it was about building HTA payer real-world evidence standards and the move towards comprehensive real-world evidence guidance. And you'll see that the one that we have today is somehow connected to that one. So we are connecting the loop actually. The second quarterly meeting we had last year was focused on artificial intelligence. There was a presentation of the AI unit of the Advanced School of Health Economics and Management, and followed by a presentation of the development and implementation of an HTA framework for AI-supported technologies. And they were presented by Americo Cicchetti and Sinya Dalberg. And the last one we had last quarter, it was about artificial intelligence in outcomes research and the ethical issues of application of artificial intelligence in healthcare, provided by Puya Guraili and Golnar Kamian from Canada. So with this, let's move to the next one, please. We have also other communications. We have a monthly communication which goes out to all of our members, which summarizes main activities of the IG and also specific events related to the IG. We have a HTA, we have also HTAi YouTube channel and also a LinkedIn channel. And we have also a newsletter which have been started, and hopefully we will be able to follow, because now, with the help of our new fresh technical officers, we will be able to follow and distribute our newsletters to all of you. With this, I would like to go to the next one and hand over to Elena, who will talk about our Twitter account and the today presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Masood. Very, very briefly to say that we've established, by popular demand, we've established a Twitter channel. The intention was to have a brief communication and post events, and we're more than happy to disseminate anything HTAi, and of course, with particular focus to the real world data and evidence generation. and in relation to artificial intelligence. So please follow us and also tag us if you want us to disseminate to other channels. We're also happy. We didn't anticipate so much interest in the channel. We thought it was going to be small, but it's already it's a lot of interest already. So we're happy about that. If there are any other ideas you have about how you want to communicate, there is already an HTAi platform, and we're hoping that we will have potentially creating smaller working groups and smaller teams there. So please, by all means, reach out to us if you're wondering how you can interact. I don't know, Bryce is our kind technical support. I do not know whether you can see the people in the waiting room, but I can see, but there appear to be many, so perhaps we open it. I will try to continue admitting people. Okay, so very quickly, we are particularly happy today because we will be having a pretty well-known people in the domain and in the realm of HTA. And this effort is an effort in which we have people like Karen Fassi and Ron Ackhurst and Oriol Sola Morales presenting. The effort was an effort initiated by Novartis, and particularly the real-world evidence Workstream. And this is, of course, and this is something that we should say, it's a European initiative for new reimbursement and access approaches. We have kindly asked our presenters to be let us say basic, but to provide, to make the slides and further information available, and also to discuss a little bit more the aspect of data governance, which is a topic on which we get a lot of questions. Perhaps now I need to maybe stop sharing and to very, very briefly introduce our first speaker. I think, Karen, I think you go first, unless, yes, no? Yes, so very briefly to say a few words about Karen, although I don't think Karen needs introductions. So Karen has been a member of HTS since its inauguration, potentially since its inception. She works with all stakeholders. She's a little bit of a legend in terms of establishing patient interaction for developing HTA. She's a statistician by formal training, and she has a particular interest in the use of real-world evidence. She's also a consultant to the European Policy Organization, EUreccA, and she facilitates the work in the real-world evidence for decisions initiative. So thank you very much, Karen, for being with us.
Elena, thank you so much for the opportunity to present to the interest group today. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. And as you've indicated, I have a number of hats, but today I'm here as a consultant to FIPRA on behalf of the Real World Evidence for Decisions initiative to talk to you about pillars to shape comprehensive real world evidence for HTA and payers. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the work of Real World Evidence for Decisions, which is very much like this IG. It's meant to be a learning network. And perhaps the difference is that it's really the thought child of EUreccA, who's the CEO of the Belgian payer Inami Riziv. And Jo, many years ago, about 6 or 7 years ago, identified a number of high-cost innovative products that were coming over the horizon, that were coming with a paucity of data but high cost, and recognizing that actually the clinical development program may not be enough for reimbursement decision making, and asking the question whether real world data could help reimbursement decisions. And so he initiated a number of projects which were informal white papers, and gradually over the years more HTA bodies and payers, not just in Europe but in the US and in Canada as well, have sort of come together to create this really multi-stakeholder learning network. So here's the steering group. You can see on the top some of the great faces in HTA in the payer world, which we all know, but this is multi-stakeholder. It's driven by the needs of HTA and payer bodies, but we have people like Simona Borselle from Eurodis, International Patient Group for Rare Diseases, Hans-Georg Eichler, ex-regulator now in the Austrian Social Insurance Institution. We have clinicians, a cancer clinician, academics. And this initiative is supported by a number of pharmaceutical companies, AstraZeneca, Novartis, Roche, and Takeda, and UCOPE, an industry association. They pay the secretariat. I have received a fee from them for the work I do with them, but all others contribute because they see this as as being helpful to issues they want to address. And so one of the things that we've been talking about as ever is how is real world evidence used by HTA payers? And I know that Ashley Jaska talked to you about that last year. And Novartis shared with us a scoping study that they had undertaken to actually look at whether real world data was being used by HTA payer organizations. If not, why not? And were there any solutions available to the barriers which were being perceived by payers? And so they undertook this scoping research and shared it with us as a network, and it was presented to us and a discussion panel of HTA payer experts last autumn. And I want to present that work to you and ask the network here, the interest group, some questions. So the first objective was to summarize the barriers to real-world data, real-world evidence uptake by HTA agencies and payers. But firstly, let's look at where real-world data is being used. So the first thing they did was to look particularly at the EU sector to identify papers where there had been interviews with HTA and payer leaders about their views on use of real-world data. And what they found was that real-world data has been used in HTA submissions and decision-making for many, many years. So in terms of quality of life, epidemiology, compliance, extrapolation, natural history, all of these things are areas where we already use real-world data. But in a sense, the challenge comes when we look at whether that information can be used to assess treatment effects. And this has become an increasing challenge for HTA bodies with these highly innovative technologies, which often come with single-arm trials of short duration, perhaps not in the population which is needed for reimbursement. And we're seeing payers keen to use real-world evidence as main evidence for clinical effectiveness. When we look at the papers, what we can see is that then in that situation, payers say there are a range of challenges with using real-world evidence to demonstrate treatment effectiveness. And we can consider them in 4 areas. Firstly, data in terms of availability, governance, and quality. Then methodological issues in terms of design and analysis. Then there are issues about trust and transparency and reproducibility of studies which industry may have undertaken or may have been undertaken in a different jurisdiction. And then questions about policy and partnerships. Who should be evaluating the data and how should that be done? After discussing this with our colleagues, what we identified was that these issues that we'd identified in the EU were actually similar in North America. Looking at the literature again from Canada and North America, we saw these same issues coming up. And if we delve into these issues a bit more, we can see that the challenges in terms of data are issues of poor quality of data, including incomplete and missing data, issues around data standardization and pros and cons of using common data models like the OMOP in Europe, timeliness of data, lack of robust data, and inadequate data infrastructures to collect data when we're undertaking a prospective study within a health system, disparate data infrastructures, access and processes, and governance issues. In terms of methodology, we know that actually HTA payers will always say that when you can do a randomized controlled trial, please do so, because that's the best evidence of effectiveness. And really, we see real-world evidence as being complementary. We do not see real-world evidence as replacing randomized controlled trials. And whenever we talk to HTA payers, we always start with that point first. But recognizing that in some cases we need to use real-world evidence for other questions beyond the basic treatment effectiveness question, and to expand that understanding of long-term effectiveness, for example, we need to think about selection bias for non-randomized studies. We need to think about the sophisticated statistical methodologies that are coming through and identify which ones are fit for HTA and payer purposes. and recognize that analysis of real world data is not an expertise that many HTA bodies have, and we need to build capacity in this arena. In terms of trust and transparency and reproducibility, I've kind of indicated some of the areas earlier, but there's a definite question about robustness of findings. I know that Ashley will have talked about the need for sensitivity analyses in real-world evidence studies. And this real lack of trust in data from other countries or other organizations is always a consideration. In terms of policy and partnerships, we recognize a lack of harmonization, and Dimitra mentioned the GDPR, and we see different interpretation of GDPR in different member states in the EU, which causes concern. And I won't dwell any more on governance issues because Oriel will be talking about that later. So we discussed these issues with decision makers and came up with our 4 pillars to build robust real-world evidence. But when we discussed this with the HTA payers, they said, these are all well and good. We definitely need to address these 4 pillars. But actually, we also really need to build kind of management support to recognize that HTA and payers need to be investing in terms of human resources and capacity to really upskill in the area of real-world evidence development and understanding. So that's our sort of presentation of where we see the key issues in terms of building real-world evidence that's fit for decision-making for HTA and payers. But Novartis also did a second scoping search, which was saying, if we have these barriers, are there any solutions out there that we can find that may be suitable for HTA payers? And you'll see here a wide range of guidances from many trusted organizations. And our question really that we're researching at the moment is, can we use the guidance that has been presented from others in HTA and payer context? And so this year, we're taking each of the 4 pillars, looking at the guidances that we found to address, for example, data availability and quality, and exploring them in more detail to say, given the issues we have, will these existing guidances help us resolve our challenges? And one of the first things we've done in this, EUreccA, always from a very practical perspective, said, well, one of the challenges we have in Europe is we want to align data collection requirements, particularly in small countries like Belgium and Scotland, where I'm from, so that we can aggregate data at a later stage, but we don't understand each other's contexts. And the context of a country differs very much in terms of its real-world data capacity. So we have created a questionnaire, as you'll see here, which tries to summarize the health system organization and funding and capture the key elements that we need to understand about real-world data collection. So is there a unique patient identifier? Can it be linked to diagnosis? Are there good data catalogs? How can we appraise data suitability? Is that done by an HTA body? Is there a secure operating environment which an HTA body can work with? Do you collaborate across borders? And we've sent that questionnaire to all of these countries. And my first call out to you all as an interest group is, if you would like to fill in that question for your country or region, please email me and I'll put my email in the chat and I'll be happy to send that questionnaire to you. We've started getting responses back and they're proving to be very valuable. So we hope that we'll be putting these sort of templates for countries available on our real world evidence for decisions website. And if HTAi would like to link or share that, we'd be happy to do so. Having done that as a first step to understand the kind of context of each country, we're now coming together to take that first pillar of data quality in particular. And we've identified some key guidances which we will be discussing. So members will be looking and identifying what these key guidances. So for example, from IQWiG, the German HTA authority who published this report about use of health system data and good practices. We'll be looking from HTA, the Irish authority, looking at their guidance on a data quality framework. We'll be looking at the AHRQ work. Most of you will know that AHRQ in the US were the first organization to really provide comprehensive guidance on real-world data collection. So we'll be looking in detail about what they say about assessing data quality. And within Europe, we have the European Network for HTA tool to assess quality. This has been quite interesting because as we've looked at how this tool, which has been published now for about 18 months, has been used, we haven't been able to find any HTA bodies that have actually used it in real practice in the EU, but we have found it being used in Canada. So we'll be hearing from the Canadians to hear how they're using a European tool. So that's always interesting. And we'll be also not just looking at the HTA world, but other interesting and trusted resources, such as the FDA, who've just produced this excellent guidance on real world data, which was published last autumn and is out for consultation, and also looking at cross-organizational multi-stakeholder groups like ISPI, who also provide guidance, a little bit older. And so the way we're addressing this is that we try to look at areas that have proved challenging to HTA bodies. In terms of use of real world data, where there's been a mismatch between what industry has submitted and how HTA bodies have evaluated that evidence that they found challenging with it. And we're moving on in our next session to talk about methodology. And what we want to do in that is to really present cases of either where industry has submitted a real world evidence study and had pushback from the HTA or payers to say, we don't trust this, there are methodological challenges. We want to understand what those methodological challenges were that have been put to industry. And we want to hear from HTA and payers to hear about the kind of cases that they have. So we have an example, for example, where there were 3 different forms of natural history that were presented as evidence to a submission, and it felt like the company were cherry picking, and we can evaluate how the HTA body then evaluated those 3 different approaches. So I'm going to ask Bryce now to present a Slido to you, and this will ask a question to you about, do you have any cases that we can share? What are the big issues that we should be addressing if we consider methodological concerns? So is it external comparators? Is it indirect comparisons? Is it missing data? In the Slido, which I'll now hand over to Bryce, you'll see the questions. So please do contribute to that. And as you're doing that, I think we'll open up for a few questions of clarification before we move on to the other speakers.
The Slido link is now in the chat, so please just follow that link and you will be able to join the poll.
Thank you very, very much, Karen, for the very comprehensive presentation. There is a comment from Shamila Souza, and it's good to see her, but she's asking whether the questioner we requested to drop an email for any country, whether there's interest for Brazil and LATAM, and whether that's included, because that's also a question for me, because of course we have some particular conditions, if you like, in Europe, particularly in the EU, also given the new regulation. So are you scoping globally? Would you be interested in that? Have you already looking on LATAM or other areas?
We haven't looked at LATAM yet, I will be honest. We started with the EU, but actually Canada have kind of come in, so have the US. So actually we're open. And I think this template will be quite general. And so we would very much welcome a Brazil or other countries in the LATAM region, or indeed Asia Pacific, to contribute to that, because I think it would help our discussions about where there may be regional differences. So Shamila, please do email me and I'll send you the questionnaire.
So we can see data quality, data definition, selection of bias, causality, confounding factors, which are interrelated. So perhaps what we have to work with versus exactly what we do with it. But maybe in the interest of time, and because we had a delay for technical issues to start, maybe we move forward with the next presentation, and then we have a little bit more time for interaction and for questions. And I think unless Karen, you have a comment, I'll go to Ron, or you would like to comment on the Slido output as we see?
That's fine. I'll be taking that back to real world evidence for decisions, and I'll be reporting back to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much also for the comprehensive presentation. Now, the next speaker does not need an introduction because it's Ron Eckhurst, and he's the executive chair of in the newly found Humanity. With its origins and people also from BresMed. He has been instrumental in shaping the field of health economics in academia and has been very active founding the York Health Economics Consortium, the University of York, and at SAR, the University of Sheffield, who's also leading very much in HTA. He's Professor Emeritus in the Health Economics for Sheffield, and he's also a visiting professor in Eötvös Loránd at Corvinus University in Budapest. And he has indeed been 40 years both an academic and methodologist, we would say, tracking and in being involved in many methodological developments in HTA. Ron has had also many UK government and policy roles. I think most of you or many of you must know that he has been a founding member of NICE's appraisal committee, and he has served in the NICE topic selection committee. And also, of course, he has been involved in multiple other committees like the Rare Diseases Group and as a special advisor to the York Parliamentary Group on Access to Medicines and Medical Devices. So I would be very, very happy. We are honored to have you, Ron. Oh my God, you're already sharing slides. I didn't notice. Okay. I was not sticking to this. I think I said a few more things, but we're very happy to have you here. And if you go perhaps into from beginning, if you go into presenters mode.
Yeah, I think that's what I should be in already.
Not you have to press the from beginning button one more time, I think, unless it's like
okay.
And then give it some time.
That's actually disappeared off my screen. Oh dear. I don't know how to get back. Hang on.
It's okay.
I'll stop the share and go through again.
Thank you. It's okay.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Is that all right now?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm very, very conscious of time. So what I'm going to try to do in about 10 minutes is cover several person years of work. So it's going to be a bit sketchy. So I apologize for that. What I'm going to do, if this will move on. Sorry, it's just not moving.
Elena, I think Elena has a backup, Ron. Let's not worry.
I do have a backup, Ron. Ron, just to give you, I can certainly do the slide sharing, but just to try one more thing. If you're trying to move with a cursor of up and down but does not work, you need to go to the bottom left of your screen and press the next slide. It should be appearing there in your screen. If it's not, then I can try and share. I can try and share these slides.
Okay, now that's worked. Okay, there we are.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, right. So I'm going to be, I think I've moved on to two now, actually. Oh, no, maybe not. Okay. Right. I'm going to talk about a project that we've been involved in. I'm going to give a brief overview about the whole project. And I'm going to very, very quickly say something about the results of 3/4 of it. The fourth part is about governance, and Oriol, who's going to be following me, is going to be talking about that. These are the guilty people who are on the real world evidence steering group. It's part of the work's come out of a collaboration called EUreccA 2025, which was initiated by Novartis and supported by them financially. It's a stakeholder forum working with experts from a range of EU countries. It's European focused. And the overall aim is to improve patient outcomes by advancing innovation in Europe. And the idea is to try to get more efficiencies in the healthcare system and get earlier access to effective healthcare technologies. Within the overall collaboration, the Real World Evidence Steering Group was established to review the barriers that existed to effective use of real world evidence in bringing in new medicines, and actually address then what might be done about those barriers. The way in which the project evolved reflected the fact that there was a very strong perception among EUreccA participants that although the use of real world evidence in product registration was gaining ground, there was quite a lot of resistance to its use in HTA. And that reflected the kind of things that we've already heard Karen talk about: mistrust, concern about its potential for biasing decisions, and so on. Now, early on in the process, we received a strong steer from EUreccA that we should never talk about strengths and weaknesses of real world evidence without specifying the question that was being addressed and the source of evidence that was being used. Because one of the things, there were a lot of people who were involved in EUreccA who had served on various decision-making committees, and they were aware of the fact that particular problems commonly arose, which were actually unique to the particular combinations of question and data source. It might also, of course, reflect the context as well, the stage of the decision and so on. And the belief that was expressed by the group was that general advice about how to best use real world data could only go so far. You always had to be looking at the specific. So our advisors then, we and our advisors came to the view that what was needed was a repository of experiences in using real world data to support HTA and related decision making. And there needed to be an appropriate, helpful structure for keeping and retrieving the material. So a core idea that came out was that, at least for a period, there needed to be a repository which both agencies and companies that were trying to use real world data when they're coming to market could go to it, so that they could align on previous experiences and agree in the context what would be the appropriate kind of this is not to replace the vast amount of data on how things, the guidance on how things should be done, how data should be collected, how it should be analyzed, but to try to look at the specific instances. And of course, all of this requires a transparent sharing, which we're quite a long way from at the moment, I think. The view that that's being expressed here was discussed and validated with a wider stakeholder group, and including testing out the idea that a repository might be helpful. Now, since we started our work, several other groups have independently come to a similar conclusion, although sometimes with differing ideas for the type of information that should be stored in a repository. But the idea that we need something like that has come from a variety of sources, and there, some of them are listed there. So our assessment of what would be helpful in terms of moving things on had led to the development of a couple of other pieces of work. One we're calling the taxonomy, which is a suggested classification within which we could represent decisions that have been made in the past and which are anticipated in the future, and also, of course, the data governance checklist as well. Now, through our scoping work, we identified 4 topic areas, what we did, we looked, I mean, the order in which this was done actually was to look at the issues and barriers first, then we were looking at appropriate methods for robust data collection and analysis. Then we looked at the taxonomy, although these things were all running in parallel. And also in parallel, we looked at the data governance as well. And we wanted to develop some practical solutions. Now, how do we do this? Well, given the amount of published evidence available and the incredible pace of research in the area, we couldn't begin to do a comprehensive review of the literature that was out there. And so we did a pragmatic, iterative search. Some of the stuff that Karen was talking about that was provided to her group from Novartis actually came from our review of evidence, I think. We also, because we couldn't do a systematic review, we tried to use expert advisors to minimize the risk that we miss key material and ideas. And that's because of limitations in our reviewing. And of course, language, the reviewing we did was only in English. And we combined what we learned from the process of reviewing with some case studies in particular countries, and a single product case study, that's on DOACs, and with stakeholder engagement. We had an advisory board of, these were all people that were involved at a very senior level on the payer side of HTA in the various countries. We also used the Delphi panel to try to address, in particular, the governance issues, and Oriel will be talking about that. And that allowed us to test ideas and findings at key points. And our idea was to develop a policy paper to try to support engagement with decision makers. Sorry, let's just slowing down again. Okay, so briefly, these were our stakeholder engagements here, the core team. You can have a look at the slide afterwards to see who was involved. In the interest of time, I move on. So very quickly, moving on to the results, everything but the governance. We also were looking at the same sort of papers as Karen was talking about, and the sort of points that came out of our review were similar to those that Karen was itemizing. It was unclear for exactly which HTA questions, real-world evidence, might be acceptable. The evidence should be fit for the particular purpose to which it was put. It's clear that real-world data are already accepted for many questions, but mainly beyond treatment effects. And there was suspicion around its use for estimating relative effect size. And that often reflected, suspicion often reflected interaction between the weaknesses in the data and the steps that were taken to avoid bias. And there was a lot of suspicion that rather than avoiding bias, the statistical methods might be introducing it. And so quite a lot of suspicion there. And so one of the things that really struck us was how the overwhelming mass of writing about the use of real-world data was in looking at relative effectiveness, but it actually represented only a very small use of real-world data in the context of HTA. It was other kinds of uses to which it was mainly put. And so the conclusions we came to are the ones I've already highlighted, the particular issues about the pairing of question and data source mattered. And we agreed that a taxonomy of the capturing and recording material should be based around the questions that were addressed and the data sources that we used, those pairings. So we identified 270 pairings, 27 questions using 10 different types of data source. And we use that to develop our taxonomy. And we also, for each of those examples, we set out to find examples in practice of use in practice around the different HTAs. Again, it's the transparency of the various agencies and so on, and the ability to actually find out how data were used in decisions limited what we were able to do. So some sources were better than others. We have incorporated within the taxonomy general methods and guidance material to provide details on the methodological issues that arise in conducting the analysis, targeted analysis, using any or all of the 10 types of data source. We've produced some specific real-world data source methods and guidance, and we've included a list of real-world data source names, although of course that will go out of date very quickly. And the user then has to decide whether a particular pairing is relevant to what they want to investigate and to make the decision whether or not to go with it. Whoops, what's happened there? Yeah. That's it, sorry. So just a simple question. Say that somebody is trying to look at a question in the context of an HTA, what the effectiveness is of the current standard of care for the treatment of melanoma. And let's say they're thinking of using the SIA registry. First of all, our taxonomy would point them to general guidance, which look at the general issues in trying to do this kind of work. And there are 2 references we picked out there as examples. You could also find in the literature, and we will be signposted to those, commentary in academic papers that have addressed the particular issues that arise here. Is there an example of where this has been done before? There is one, which is in a nice appraisal, where you can actually go and look at the guidance material and see what the committee had to say about the use of it there. And interestingly, in this particular instance, the committee did use real-world evidence, but didn't use sources, the original sources that the company went to them with. The committee accepted the use of using external evidence, but they came up with their own preferred sources. In this case, they preferred an alternative source to the SIA registry. And they gave reasons as to why that was the case. So you would be able to look back at that example. And the idea is that if you were going forward, trying to look at this kind of question, you would learn from that kind of example, the way in which the data had been used before. And we would begin to actually to learn from doing and keep recording what was going on. The idea, though, is that the taxonomy would be, as we put it out, is a beginning. It's not an end at all. And it needs a lot more developing. And it would need the whole of the community that's using real-world data to accept it and to be responsible for developing it in a kind of wiki kind of way. And that means that any repository would need to be curated. Certainly if you're using this kind of framework, it would need constant updating. So this is put out there as a suggestion and a beginning. It's quite substantial. I mean, it's possible to answer, to look at a lot of stuff within it. But I haven't got time to go through the detail now, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for the very comprehensive presentation. And I think also for presenting a lot of things and being mindful of time too. That's always a challenge. We had said that if there's a critical question, then we'll take it in the interval immediately after the presentation. Otherwise, we have Oriol present first too. I don't see something critical unless, Bryce, do we have something which has come via Slido which is critical?
I have not seen any questions come.
Okay, I know that some people are, there's 50 or 60 people watching already on YouTube. Maybe it's now more, I don't know, or less. But if something critical comes, please flag it. Yeah. I think also Oriol does not need an introduction, but okay. So Oriol is a medical doctor by training, and he has been the director for regional HTA body authority in Spain. He's also been advisor to the 3 ministers of health, 3 Catalan ministers of health. He has been a founding member of the EUreccA Joint Action, and he has combined, I think, both academia and consulting for the past few decades. He is the founder of the HIT, which I think most of us know as an early market access consultancy, and he has worked with the top 10 pharma companies. And he has also been in the position of launching 3 medicines in terms of market access and pricing strategies. We're very happy to have him here. We're doubly happy because he has kindly agreed to discuss in a little bit more detail governance aspects, which are proving to be of interest and also a big challenge to all of us. So Oriol, maybe.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and second for the opportunity to present the work that we've done with all the team. I think it is very important to underline that this is a collective team, and where we've been using part of the material that Ron was presenting, and Ron and team and different teams that were collectively working in EUreccA. So I'll move forward again in the interest of time. So I think there were two overarching questions. So the question is, can we optimize the use of real-world data in HTA? But I think from the data governance perspective, the context question or the background question is, why is it that everyone talks about real-world evidence? Everyone talks about effectiveness, and that is what is thought to be the important metrics. But then when real-world data or evidence is presented, we have real problems in accepting it. And we thought that there could be issues beyond the data and the data points. So let me start with why do we think it is not accepted? First thing is that a lot of the discussion, and we've seen Ron's presentation and we've seen also Karen's presentation, we think is very much about the methodological quality of the data. And obviously that generates some concerns about the consistency, the validity of the data. If you had a look into the poll that Karen already launched, it's basically that everyone is concerned about the quality. Then I think there's another dimension, which is, okay, now we're kind of convinced that data are here, they are here to stay. And because of that, there's an increasing fear that too many data may be unmanageable. And that generates also a lot of questions. And the third thing is that because there's a wealth of data out there, there's a concern on how all these data are gathered and managed. And some additional questions arise from that. So, such as who stores the data and how are these data generated? What is the safety level of those data? Are these data ever shared? I think we all have the experience of receiving Excel files with full of names and identifiers, and that obviously raises some problems. Where are these data used and for what? Does the patient know? Does the patient know that we're using those data to generate maybe new evidence? And maybe one final question is, who owns the data? And it is important because unless we get around all these questions, it will be really difficult to generate some trust on the data. Then I think the elephant in the room is GDPR. GDPR, as defined by EU, is a law to protect individuals' rights to privacy. And it is funny to see that in their presentation in the webpage of the European Commission, they say the GDPR law is the toughest privacy and security law in the world, which certainly does not make life easy to all of those trying to manage data. And they continue saying they will levy harsh fines on those using the data inappropriately. So the second point is, what are the principles of GDPR? The data protected, the data have to be used in a lawful and fair way. They have to have a limit on the purpose. They cannot be gathered for just anything. You have to really collect the minimum data set that you need. It has to be accurate. There has to be storage limitation in both capacity and time. It has to be there has to be an integrity and confidential access to the data. You have to be accountable. It has to be safe. There has to be data protection, and obviously you need to have a consent from the owner, the generator of the data. But at the same time, there are some waivers. If you've had an unambiguous consent, you can use the data beyond what is initially thought. You can use the data if that is needed to get into a contract, if it affects somebody's life, if you have to comply with a legal obligation. And then maybe the two interesting one, if it's of public interest or you have a legitimate interest. What is legitimacy? I think that's something we need to explore because legitimacy may be important in terms of healthcare ecosystem. Then the question is, what is data governance? Well, data governance can be defined as a strategy to manage the usability, availability, integrity, quality, security of data to ensure that we get the utmost of its potential. Generally, we tend to see four main domains: data privacy and security, data management and linkage, which includes the quality, data access management, who access what, and then what do you use for the data or the real world evidence that would emanate from it. There has been a lot of discussion, as Karen pointed out, on governance and related issues. But if you go into the details of the many reports that are out there, I would say there is a little in-depth analysis of how to really conduct all these data governance policies. And here I'm trying to show you just a sample of the many reports that have been published, and some of them are even entitled data governance issues. But then when you go to the stuff that is published, there's relatively little published. So what was our approach? First, trying to understand the link between data governance and GDPR. Validate if a tool in data governance could help minimize the limitations imposed by GDPR. Propose that tool to increase the credibility of the data, and design a roadmap that would lead to the implementation of that tool to improve the data governance policy. And finally, we wanted to understand what is the limits, which are the limits of the legitimate use of the data. What have we done? We first, together with the bigger group, we reviewed the data governance literature. From there, we prepared a tool, and we prepared it in a way of a checklist, separated in different subdomains. And then we wanted to explore, excuse me, the more theoretical issues. That was done on a Delphi panel. The Delphi panel involved 25 experts across Europe. And here you have the list of the countries: the UK, Germany, Spain, Italy, France, the Netherlands, and Portugal. The Delphi panel had 3 rounds. In every round, the responders or the participants were sent 25 questions, and they had to rank it from 1 to 10 in terms of their importance. We also analyzed the consensus between the different participants. After round 1 and 2, participants were given back the feedback, as in any Delphi panel, of the previous round, with the raw comments raw text comments on the different items. And we define important with 3 different cutoff levels, like high, medium, and uncertain. And then consensus, we thought that we could agree that there was consensus if less than 2 points of standard deviation was achieved in the overall result. Here are the just a very brief summary of the questionnaire. The questionnaire had 4 sections: data privacy and security, data management and linkage, access and generation and use of real-world evidence, with this number of questions up to 25. And then at the end, what we added is 3 different questions trying to understand whether individuals would be happy to use a cutoff threshold to try to qualify whether the checklist was acceptable or non-acceptable, or even excellent. And we, before the Delphi panel, defined this excellent over 20 points, over 20 checks of yes as a result. This is the summary of the results in terms of numerical format. We could spend probably hours talking about this and the details of the conversation. Here you have the number of participants. Not everyone participated in every round, but we're quite confident that the level of participation was quite good. And what you see is basically 2 things. There is a progressive improvement on the level of importance and on the level of consensus. But yes, there were some items which did not reach consensus. After the Delphi panel, what did we come up with? In fact, we eliminated 10 items of the initial questionnaire because there was not enough consensus. And we left it with 15 items, the same in data privacy and security. We had to cross out some items in data management and linkage. And basically, those were linked to the request to prior register the type of usage of real-world evidence studies. And that was mainly linked to the idea that if that was a request, investigators would not use the tool. Sorry, not the data governance tool, but would not keep doing real-world data studies. Then on access management, there were some items on cost that were removed because there was no consensus whether that should be included or not. And the main issue was that it would be, again, a disincentive if that had to be published. And finally, on the generation of use, we had to take away some items on a minimum quality criteria on the dataset defined before the usage of the dataset, again, because of the fear that it would disincentivize researchers. At the end of the day, we came up with this tool that would be ready for use. And what are the next steps that could be done? So in terms of policy, it is clear that we need to educate that there has to be a data governance policy in place, that there has to be a minimum quality threshold on the data governance policy, and that the data governance policy needs to be reviewed and updated regularly for it to be relevant. And regarding the data, there has to be a limit on the storage of the data, and we may want to see, or we may want to ask for a legitimate purpose of that storage. We must ask healthcare professionals to inform faithfully the patient of the purpose and especially of the benefit of that data storage. We need them to understand that there has to be a data governance in place, which they have to follow. Anonymization is still an issue. We need to make data management policies more transparent, and we need to make access to data more explicit to make a data governance more relevant. What are the next steps? We're in the process of communicating this work and hopefully disseminating it. This is part of the work. We hopefully will have a meeting in the HTAi meeting, and we are hoping to present in conferences and interest groups in different countries, and we're working on it as we speak. And we're having different contacts at different levels. And before I finish, what are the next steps for a data governance definition and implementation? Well, we think there are several topics that need some thought. First, the definition of a minimum data quality before the usage of the data. We need to accept that was removed from the checklist, but it was because we thought, I said, that this would disincentivize. I think we need to insist on the fact that quality, if we want to use them and we want to store them, need to have a minimum quality. Then on the policy side, we think it would be useful to register those real-world evidence studies and the real-world data that would support those, defining clear rules for third-party data analysis, so who stores the data and who analyzes those data, and asking ourselves whether data governance is enough for sharing those data in an appropriate way, and how on what to agree. And finally, we found that there are two items which are what we define minefields, at least in terms of the political debate. One is the open access data to data sets. The question or the point is, if the data are appropriately anonymized, should we be able to share them? What is the problem of sharing them? And then a secondary question is, are data a public good, which should be shared to as many as possible? And finally, the question is there legitimacy in accessing those data if that is for the improvement of healthcare? And that obviously includes manufacturers. And that is a debate that we think needs to be held in the coming months to years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Oriol. I think you made Dimitra and perhaps other people and also me very happy. There are several questions. First of all, to thank people because they have stayed with us at 75 minutes. We have another 10-15 minutes to discuss. There are some questions. Some are addressed to, it's a mixed bag. So some are addressed to the RWE AI team and also to Oriol. So I'll start with this first one. Is HTAi tracking citizen science initiatives? Not per se, but EUFA is, because there's quite beautiful work out there in terms of reporting for the Sustainable Development Goals. There's very interesting papers coming out because you need different sources of data also to report on the Sustainable Development Goals. So we have an effort monitoring that. I'm not quite sure what the purpose of the question is, but more than happy to discuss. Perhaps also something we can reach out to the patient and citizen interest group. I think this was from Sharmila, yes? No, this was, yeah. Maybe also, Oriol, this is addressed to you. Maybe, are you tracking, monitoring citizen science initiatives?
Yes, well, as said by my two colleagues, it is very difficult to track all the initiatives, so we're doing our best. But we try to focus on more EU level policy and some more academic initiatives. But certainly, if anything comes up, that would be interesting. I think the appropriate answer is we should not expect governments and academics to lead this debate, because it may well be that patients and patient associations have their say and start something that is beyond the remit, and that is the successful solution. So we need to keep an eye to it, certainly.
Okay, and there's, thank you very much for this. I've also added a paper for you, Shabila, in case you want to discuss this, please reach out, because we're discussing continuously indicator reporting, and but particularly for public health interventions, which like vaccines, we saw that with COVID, we need to go a little bit further than traditional. We're starting to discuss traditional real-world evidence, real-world data sources. So one more question for Aurel is, how much of the legitimacy should be defined in law, by law? For example, do we need a European level equivalent to the Finnish law on secondary use of health data, for example? We kind of do for GDPR, but perhaps asking Aurel on this, what your take is?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know which one is the appropriate level of definition. What I really do know is that we need to have that debate. Whether that ends up on a EU directive, on an amendment of the GDPR legislation, or in let's say lower levels of laws. I'm not the appropriate person to say. What I'm certain to think, or what I do think, is that we are all very fearful of sharing our healthcare data, but we do not fear sharing all of our data. We all, day in, day out, or twice a day, or 5 times a day, share our cookies with thousands of people, and we don't have any problem. And we know that they are able to understand much more of our behavior than ourselves, because we do respond to certain metrics. So what I would say is that we have a bit of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We don't like sharing our healthcare data, though we are happy to share our visa data. And yeah, that's maybe something a bit odd.
Thank you. I was going to invite Ron and Karen and Dimitra to comment, but Dimitra and Karen have kind of preempted me by raising their hands. So I'll go first to Karen because she's our guest.
Thank you. I was just going to talk about, in a sense, patients' perspective. And Aurel saying there, we don't want to share our health data. I think it's easy to generalize. And actually what many patients and patient groups tell us is we absolutely want to share our data to get the best possible care. And patients are sometimes surprised when different sectors of the health system don't have their own data to give them the best individual care. Many patients also want to have their data shared for what they would call research and care improvement processes. They get concerned when they hear about national health systems, perhaps liaising with Dr. Google or Dr. Amazon. And so there is a nuance to that citizens' debate. And sometimes we need to get more specific about what we're talking about. And I think that comes down to whether it may not be legislation, but implementation, because often, even if we have legislation, it can be interpreted differently.
Thank you. Dimitra, bear with us. Ron, please, you want to comment? We also have some discussions, which perhaps you want to take it a bit further. We're discussing a lot that for many years we had the UK is now not, if you like, together. In the EU, it's also divergent approaches. So I don't know if you want to comment on that and what the implications may be for methodologists, but the floor is yours.
Okay, well, the point that I wanted to make is really about how the question and the context is really important. Aurel was talking about, the minimum data standards. One of the examples we came across was a data set that was about 97% complete, which looks pretty good. But when the agency concerned tried to use it, they actually found that the remaining 3%, because of the really administrative reasons, the way in which the data were collected and moved around, the remaining 3% contained all the deaths. So for some purposes, that 97% coverage was fine. But actually, if you wanted to analyze anything about death, then it is useless. And one of the things that I just wanted to say, I mean, I've been 23 years now on NICE committees, and we've spent, and even more now than ever, because I work with very rare diseases, we spend all our time trying to extract information from poor data sets, and in some respects they are inevitably poor, and so actually having some rules around what's appropriate, how we can do that, and how we can learn from the way it's been done before is really a very important thing to do. I'm not going to answer your second question, by the way.
It's okay. No, but I mean, for the perspective of Europeans, I mean, I'm UK trained, and I was there for almost 20 years, and I thought we had pretty good and comprehensive electronic health records. I still do. Having lived in Germany and in the Netherlands, I still do, but how we use them and how we harvest that's another matter. But maybe before I go to Masoud, I give the floor to Dimitra, and also Dimitra, it would be good if you have in mind to address the aspect of legitimacy in relation to secondary use. What we've been discussing, and perhaps this is of interest to you, Karen, we've been discussing with people that have been involved in the vaccinations, and also older people, and the general feeling, we haven't measured yet, but we're planning to measure in Crete, the whole of Crete, because we're responsible for the vaccine. People are very willing to share the data if it's for the good of their community and their family, and so it also depends on why you tell them you're going to use the data. So the empowerment, engagement, involvement aspects, they need to, it's also a fear and lack of knowledge, and potentially knowing that it's for some concrete benefit. So Dimitra?
Thank you very much, Elena. I would like to thank all three speakers. Of course, the Oriol's presentation was closer to my interests, and it has been very, very interesting and fascinating for me. I would like to say, firstly, as an answer to Christian, that legitimacy is not often, if ever, defined let's say directly in law, but we have to take into consideration the particular legal framework that exists in every particular sector, and then decide if the law, the general framework, can be used as a legal basis for data processing. So also GDPR, that is the European regulation for personal data, has a particular chapter on secondary use of data. So I think that we could have a discussion on whether that is enough, or how far national implementation can benefit from the EU regulation and so on. And last, I would like to say that sometimes the perspective of each stakeholder is based on the fact that each one of them use a different ground of processing, and we should take into consideration sometimes that they don't have the same view on processing. That's all for me on benefit on time, and thank you very much again.
Thank you. Before we go to Tuanfa, Masoud has raised his hand, and both Masoud and I are in NSEP. So I'm in the working group for transparency. So we discuss very often trade-offs, because that was his comment. But then I pass the floor to Masoud. Thanks for being patient.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I wanted just to make a connection between the three presentations, and I would like to thank you all for this great afternoon. So what I wanted to just notice was that, Karen, you talked about the validity of real-world evidence. These days, we are very much talking about the transparency for the validity. Now, the question is, if I want to be transparent, I need to share something. We have, for example, a study submitted to PLOS ONE, and PLOS ONE is asking the data for the data set. Now, the question is, this data set comes from a database of 73 million people. What should we do? The trade-off between the transparency and the privacy is one thing. Then the other thing is the discussion about the minimum quality. Now, talking about the minimum quality, I think we need also to put this in the balance, because at some point we may say, okay, we are not going to send you the entire database, but we are going to send you, for example, a 1% sample of the database. So you can see what it looks like, and you can probably replicate the study results. So I think these are the things that we need to discuss and to make sure that, you know, we are aiming in the right direction. Because ultimately, and I agree with Ron about this, that being fit for purpose is the most important quality of a data set to be used, not necessarily high quality or gold standard.
Thank you, Masood. Well, what Ron mentioned echoes our interaction with the Federation of Medical Informatics, because we've been discussing core data sets, so basic descriptors, basic set of core elements. But Ron has his hands up yet. Yeah, this is in your.
I just wanted quickly to respond to Masood. I mean, I think there's all sorts of different kinds of transparency, and you picked on some that really matter. About sharing data, sharing databases. But there's also, I think it's incumbent on HTA agencies to be much more transparent about how they use the data that is presented to them by companies and why they make the decisions they do. I mean, you know, we sit and chew over the material that we've got in front of us for literally for hours sometimes, and send away and do some more work and then come back on it. And in the end, it still comes down to a judgment about whether, you know, what the information value is there, and whether the risk of bias is worth taking given the context we're in. And actually explaining some of that and making that transparent would actually be very helpful as well for all round. So it's a different kind of transparency, and it's that kind of transparent, that's one of the kinds of transparency that I would like the kind of repository I'm talking about to promote.
Thank you, Ron, for this insightful comment, I would say. There are two hands raised, and I'll go to Karen. Oh, now it's Masood. Well, Masood, maybe because we have theoretically 2 minutes left, I go to Karen and Oriol. I would also say that there are two comments that perhaps you want to consider questions. The first one had to do with, are we really collecting according to GDPR? I would say that we're not, but that's a big discussion. Maybe Karen and Oriol can also discuss that. And then there's a comment which is interesting because it pertains to the HTAs, the European health data space. And one of the comments captured in the consultation showing that fee for data access is not seen as favorable because there's the aspect of commercializing patient data. But okay, there are different views in terms of how we fund structures. So maybe I go to Karen first, and please address one of these aspects if you think it's relevant.
Just to really respond to Masood around, I think quality definitely depends on context. And I think Ron's example there was a really good one. That I think that we're not finding HTA bodies using these tools that are out there because it's a much more complex question. And actually, we need to start explaining that, because industry keeps coming to us and say, well, can you just give us the guidance and then we'll use that to generate our evidence? I think it's more complex. And I think that what we're doing is kind of unpacking some of that. I think in terms of transparency, we know why the requirements have changed in terms of publications because of the fraudulent hydroxychloroquine study, basically. And that, to me, had an important element, which was the co-authors didn't know that the data was fraudulent, that the data set was fraudulent. So for me, there's a key element there about when we work together in collaboration, we have to trust who we're working with, and actually working within secure operating environments, which we trust, are key. And I think that the whole area of secure operating environments is developing, and that's what we're seeing in our questionnaire and survey. In terms of European health data space, I think what we're seeing there is interesting, but will be somewhat limited. It isn't going to resolve all the problems. I think it's going to be based on the common data model, but it will give us a start. And this will be a conversation that continues.
Thanks very much, Karen. And I would probably echo that it's a start, but it's definitely far from being a full solution. Okay, now I will go to Oriol, who has had some responses also on the chat. I will also concur with Karen on one more point. Yes, because I was in industry at some point, we want the guidance. The guidance is either draft or is not there, is under consultation, not only for RWD, for many things. So I will go to Oriol and then I will go to Ron. And maybe Oriol, I don't know if you've had a chance to see some of the comments back to you about GDPR.
I've seen some, and obviously
you are on mute.
You do not hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
So sorry. Yeah, the GDPR requires on its own a full discussion and which are the limits, because it's a complex topic, and probably Dimitra could help us there. What I just wanted to say is that I think the word transparency has come up a couple of times, and I don't see a better transparent way of working than making the data available to all. So open data. And just allowing contrast of hypotheses and just discussing about the data. Then the data are not the problem. The problem is based on those data, which are the evidence that you can build on that data. And very importantly, whether you, so who does that? Is it a third party? And how trusted is that third party? But I think the second debate, or another debate we need to have, is, do we want to have open data?
Thank you. Okay. And there's also a comment from Sosha on fit for purpose data sources being happening at regulatory level. Yes, but not for every type of data. And the EMA does not define, I mean, actually, it's not, the FDA and the EMA define some things for regulatory acceptance, but they not necessarily define what kind of data will be generated. There is a draft guidance from FDA and from the EMA, but okay, it's a big discussion. But thanks for flagging Duke Margolis' team and the paper. Maybe go to, I think there was a hand by Ron, but now it's lowered.
Yeah, it was a legacy hand. I'm sorry, Elena.
It was not at all. And then, I mean, we are 3 minutes overtime, which is great because people are still with us. But maybe we say that we take this, we'll need a second meeting, and we look forward to seeing more exchanges and more interaction. We're very happy you were with us. We also would like to thank Sorka for supporting this and bringing us together. In questions which are more technical, would the video YouTube be available? Yes. Would it be immediately available? I do not know. Bryce knows that, but probably yes. If it's not available today, it will be available within the next few days. Generally, we make everything available. We do believe in open things. And this is why this meeting, although it's in theory a quarterly meeting for the interest group, it's open to everyone. And we'd like to circulate that we're very happy to have people, even if they're not members of the IG, we're very happy to have them in the meeting. The topic is such that we hope to have more people across the board and across sectors. And maybe pass the ball to Masoud to conclude in 1 minute, and thank very much everyone that was with us, and of course our speakers. Thanks, Bryce. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. So I think, the great discussions really don't need conclusions. Let me conclude in an awkward way. When I want to buy a car, of course, I want to look at the specifications of the car to see how much gasoline it consumes. But in reality, what I'm interested in, and I can never find in the specifications of that car, is how much this car is going to consume on the road. And this means the importance of real-world evidence, because when we look at clinical trial information, of course, they are generated in standardized situations. And we are interested in understanding the specifications of a product generated through the clinical trial. But we don't have the real picture. If we are the end users and not the government and not the regulator, if we are the end users, we are interested in knowing how good is this drug on the ground in my body. And for that, we need real world evidence, of course. Thank you very much again. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. Thanks to the speakers
Have a
who
nice day.
stayed with us.
And thank you for you, Elena. Thank you for the organization and our great team.
Sure, and thank you too for stepping in and introducing the event. Bryce has been kind enough to say to confirm, but and good to see Greek people too. Chat in the chat. Bryce has confirmed that the presentation will be available. This is for our speakers. If you think it's meaningful to share your presentations in PDF, we're happy to do that. You decide and let us know. Thank you and have a lovely afternoon.
Okay.
Thank you very much.